Hello again, Steve here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about a comment I hear quite a bit from people, and I want to try to dispel that to some extent anyway. And the comment is that within a movement, say it's politics, or say it's an issue, a political issue, or a religion, or groups of religions, or whatever, people will say, "Oh, they're all basically the same." I hear this about religion. Oh, all these major religions are all basically the same tenets and so on. All these politicians are basically all the same. They're all a bunch of liars and so on. And I would agree to a great extent that that is true, especially if they are in it for a while. People who are deeply religious have a similarity across the board. People who are in politics long enough, I'm not talking about those bushy-tailed noobs who are, really think that they can change something significantly by getting involved in and of themselves. Aside from that, when they're in long enough, they become corrupted by the system and they become part of it, and that becomes part of them, I would say. But having said that, that's where I depart. There's the similarities, but there's also differences. I'm going to point out using examples of what I mean by this. I'm going to use the example of, even groups of people that we're basically all the same. The sexes are the same and so on. Well, I want to point out that if we take, for example, a political icon of the day, or a political example of the day, a guy like Donald Trump on the one hand, and Jeremy Corbyn on the other. These, of course, I'm jumping from two different jurisdictions and all that sort of stuff, but these are examples, kind of extreme examples. I could have used Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn, or Trump versus Barack Obama and so on, but these are two characters who are current, and you see the way they respond. They're both seasoned in their fields and so on. Donald Trump, he's seen as being on the right. I wouldn't call him necessarily on the right. As far as I understand, he's been a Democrat for many, many years. And that's what I referred to him very, very long ago, even though I didn't know that. I just saw him as, this guy is a liberal Democrat. I mean, he's basically got the same politics as JFK. I mean, he's considered ultra far right, of course, now, because there's just such a bunch of hair dye in the wackos on the left, basically, as far as I can see it. So they see, some of them see Bernie Sanders as right wing. This is how ridiculous it is. Anyways, that's an aside. But you take a guy like Trump, you take a guy like Corbyn. Trump, if you watch him, I like to watch those videos, by the way, whoever puts them up, body language stuff. You can see a lot about somebody through their body language. You can see their emotions, or their lack thereof, or their control of their emotions, and so on. But Trump, the amount of maybe not literal shit, but maybe even literal shit too, but amount of sort of smear that's thrown against that guy is just amazingly off the chart. Yet you see him, and he remains amazingly stable. Amazingly stable. I talked yesterday about the conversation between Styx Hexenhammer and E. Michael Jones, and you could see the stark difference of who was in control of their emotions. Right? Trump comes out there confidently every day, and he is, like I've said before, he is probably the world's greatest practitioner of the power of positive thinking. I mean, it's just astounding to watch the guy. Anybody who's not learning from this guy, and you're not trying, you can hate the guy, but you can still learn from him. Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, talk about a child in a grown man's body. Astounding. I haven't watched this guy a lot, but I saw him once where reporters, and this is mainstream reporters as far as I know, they show up to his house to ask a question, and he runs like a scared child. Versus Trump, how's it going? This sort of thing, like, I'm here, I'm larger than life. Or Jeremy Corbyn with the crooked glasses and sneaking in behind the bushes and get away. I mean, this is starkly different. And of course, their politics are going to resemble that. I can't believe for a minute what some people will say, that, you can't just judge somebody by what they look like and how they behave and so on. No, you can. There is a correlation, not causation for sure, but there's a correlation in how it is that people behave. And if people do not have emotional control, they end up less rational, I would say. So that's political characters. Another one is men versus women. Well, once again, people like to say, we're all basically the same. And no, we're not the same. We're not physically the same. Why does that have to be talked about? And yes, of course, there's going to be those people who say, oh, but I know a woman who's very rational and so on. Yeah, sure. But the exception proves the rule, doesn't it? Less rational than men. And by necessity in this case. By absolute necessity in this case. The old saying, women raise children, men raise adults. Right? This is what society has done for thousands of years. And now we're going to say, oh, that's just sexist and so on. Well, then blame it on evolution. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. By necessity, women breastfeed and take care of very small babies. I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to have a rational discussion with a brand new baby. I've had several babies with my wife and I, but I haven't been able to have a rational discussion. Yeah, a few years old, sure, on a lower level, but not a new baby. So you have to be very emotional and connect with those emotions. You can't ask the baby when it's crying at 2 o'clock in the morning, what's its problem? You have to intuit that. You have to sort of figure it out and feel it somehow. Women can do that better than men, I submit. Men, on the other hand, had to deal with negotiating and potentially getting your head cut off by other men. You have to be a little bit more diplomatic, make the case and so on, and have an adult discussion because you're dealing mostly with adults. Historically, that's the way it was. And therefore, we've evolved in different work environments. We are different on the average, right? Next one is Young Turks versus Nick Fuentes. Or you could say almost, what's his name? Ben Shapiro versus Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes, I would say, people would say, oh, they're just podcasters. They're basically talking about two different sides of the coin, but they're basically the same. I would say no. I would say, if you look at, I remember one time, Alec Jones shows up to the Young Turks booth at some event or whatever. Well, there was this Anna something who just started freaking out and yelling at Alec Jones, and I think this, what's his name again? Chunk Yogurt, I think his name is. That's what's his name calls him. Chuck Uger or something. I forget who calls him Chunk Yogurt. He started to get angry and all that sort of stuff, and of course, Alec Jones, actually, in spite of him being sort of an actor and going around with his shirt off and everything else, he's actually seems to be often, he can be controlled in himself, right? And nevertheless, comparing him to a guy like Fuentes. Now Fuentes, he's a very, very young guy, but I find him to be very, very cool and collected. And it's interesting to watch how, even though he's so young, because you'd think that a younger person would have less emotional control. And actually, I might as well say it right now, that that's sort of part of my definition of being mature and able in the world, is to have emotional control and be able to allow the higher part of man, which is the more evolved brain and so on, the reason, to be able to, not to dispel or not to ignore the emotions, but to be able to operate in spite of them, sort things out within them, right? And so what I see, though, is that those who've got greater emotional control tend to be on the right side of the spectrum of society. What I mean when you talk about right versus left, conservative versus craziness that's going on, the leftist. And if you see that women tend to be on the left, the less emotional control. Men tend to be on the right, especially men who've got more emotional control. If you look at Jeremy Corbyn, this child or Justin Trudeau, these children in men's bodies, they are on the left, and you get guys like Trump or Stephen Harper and these sort of people. They tend to be on the right. They're more in control of themselves, more comfortable internally. They're more adult, basically. They're more mature in a way. Young Turks versus Nick Fuentes. I mean, Young Turks, they're supported by the leftists, they're put forth by it, and so on. But you look at this Anna, whatever her name is, I mean, the woman is just off the charts, out of control, at least from what I could see. And Chunk Ugart as well. He seems to get all sort of sweaty and, upset when people start to challenge some of the things that he's talking about. And whereas a guy like Fuentes, this the young Christian guy with a suit on, he's all there in control, he's laughing, he seems to be having a good old time, but he seems very much in control. So I would say that no, we're not all the same, and I would say that those who are on the right tend to have greater self-control, greater emotional control, and those on the left tend to have less. Just a tendency. I would say there's probably exceptions to everything, but that's what I see. And I think we can learn for ourselves once again. We've always got to find a lesson here. We've always got to find a lesson, I think. If we want to make, I think, more adult decisions, we should try to do what we can to temper our emotions and to have control over our emotions, not to ignore them. They're much, much older than our rationality in terms of our evolution, I would say. But they're less higher human, I would say, in some ways. And if we're going to be negotiating with people and making major decisions and so on, we have to refer to our reason at a certain point, not ignoring our emotions. Steve here again, great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, just like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.